Holy mackerel, more quick-fire mobilization questions. So that doesn't even include nuclear stuff and doesn't even include the referenda. So let's go. Who is actually responsible for getting the mobilization done? I mean, roughly, the Russian state is heavily bureaucratic, but it's heavily dysfunctional bureaucratically. And what you're going to see is typically some kind of quota descent to a region from the top. And then it's a matter of pragmatic regional politics, what happens. Which is why you are seeing huge differences and disparities across the country. And why you are seeing people just grabbed. Cars arriving into villages, people are grabbed. In some parts of the country, in other parts of the country, you're seeing people who got the notice that they're being conscripted then being released. So it's a mess. And the best way to think about it is different regions have to come up with different solutions to achieve quotas. What you said Kadyrov is partly preparing for a civil war scenario. Can you explain if this is a real risk? Well, it's a real slow burning risk, because you see, in a way, I think many things Putin has done over many years have taken Russia slowly in that direction. And we have a video about Alexander III, I think it's called Why Russian History Repeats Itself, on the main channel, which, without saying it, tries to make some parallels between Putin and Alex III, Putin's hero, even though Putin has no idea who Alex III really was because he doesn't read proper history. He just sort of reads fantasies and quote extracts. But what is interesting is that there were policies there and there were policies with Putin that were contributing to the disintegration of the empire. And of course, the mobilization so grossly uneven across the country with a very big ethnic component of inequality is going to contribute to this. Are Putin's elites planning a coup? No. We don't know, but no, overwhelmingly is the answer. They are systematically getting ready for the after Putin period. And some of that thought might be along the lines of a consensual transition if there's a health challenge with Putin. Some of that might be just be prepared for anything that happens. And some of that may be, how do I act if a coup begins to take place? So I think they're all getting ready, but they are not actually thinking of themselves as the people who will execute a coup. So they're very much preparing, but they're not producing the situation that's to come. Are Russians suffering from false consciousness? Well, don't make the mistake that you can't think about false consciousness outside of a Marxist context, but you've got to ask, what is the false consciousness false from? Is it from your real interests, from desires you would have if you weren't confused or delusional as a consequence of power and manipulation being applied to you by a political authority? So false from what? How about we say that I'll have a chat about what false consciousness is on the microscopic philosophy channel we have, Vlad Vexler philosophy. But for now, let me say this. Is it possible that the oppressor and the oppressed participate in the same picture of the world as a consequence of the power and manipulation being exercised by the oppressor over the oppressed? Of course, that's completely possible. So it's possible to say that even though the oppressed has a sincere view about something, that sincere view is a product of power being exercised over them, and that therefore means that we've got a real problem here. I don't want to jump from this to self-consciousness straight away. We don't get there just in this little step. But is that possible? Yes. The problem is that it's very difficult to diagnose the degree to which that's in any concrete situation the case. So how far is this the case? It's always a complex conversation. How would you describe the disproportionate mobilization in the regions such as Buryatia and Yakutia? It's got a genocidal aspect. Does Putin know this is the end? He senses, a very big part of him, I guess, senses that it's the end. But it's like somebody who is at a private gambling event where you can put things that are, outside of the premises on to the table, your car, your house, or whatever. And Putin is getting ready to put these things on and hope that the tiny chance of things going his way that they might give is worth the extra risk. Risk to what? Risk to escalation into thinking about using nuclear weapons, risk of even further economic devastation of Russia, and so on. So Putin realizes this is an extreme situation. He's hoping to get out of it, knowing that he's a bit of a gambler of that kind who's run out of chips at the table, but has the possibility perhaps to put some more things on and see what they do. I mean, his dream strategy is just to delay whatever is going on as far as possible until the West becomes demobilized. That's his aspiration, but it's very difficult to see now how he could do that easily for 5 years, let's say, which is what he might want. Who is deciding the fate of Russians today? Well, there's a certain sense in which Ukrainians are. Ukraine wins. That decides the fate. And then Russians need to take over and come out of their demobilized slumber. How to assess the scale of the protests? Think of it as expressive politics in Moscow and Petersburg. What do I mean? When we do effective politics, we're trying to say, well, look, I'm going to do this together with a lot of other people, and then hopefully results A, B, C might follow. They might not, but they could. Whereas expressive politics is, I don't care if nothing follows through this, I'm just going to take a stand, I'm going to do this. A lot of people are like that. So, for example, if you look at even the Russian political prisoners, you've got somebody like Karamurza, who is to a good extent in prison because that's the right thing to stand for. Yeah. Then you've got Navalny, who is not in prison because it's the right thing to stand for. He is in prison because he thinks that increases his chances of being president. So that's effective politics. Karamurza is in part in jail because he is not to be detached from his ethical integrity. That's not what Navalny is doing. The people coming out, this is where I'm going with this, the people coming out in Moscow and Petersburg in microscopic numbers are taking a moral position, but they're not engaged in effective politics. First of all, the numbers being mobilized in these cities are much, much smaller. It's happening there too, and happening arbitrarily. And people are shocked about the degree to which it's happening in Moscow and Petersburg, but it's happening much less. So people are not coming out to protect themselves from mobilization, even protect a loved one, typically. They're coming out to make a moral statement which is going to have zero positive consequences, and it's going to have enormous negative consequences for them. So it's almost like people in the Soviet Union coming out and protesting against the Soviet incursion somewhere. Say the Soviet incursion in Prague in 1968. A couple of handfuls came out, but that's not going to do anything. In the regions, it's different. In the regions, people are coming out and saying, stay away from my husband, don't send him to his death. Stay away from my kid, don't send him to his death. A lot of women coming out. And that's not a protest against the regime as such. It's shock and panic in the face of somebody from your family being taken away. And that, while it has no chance of having at this stage any effect on the stability of the regime for the next few weeks and months, unless it continues to dramatize, it could have an effect on how regions handle things. I mean, when you've got a region that's protesting a lot, there is going to be a situation where calls are made and said, come on, got to throw about these quotas a bit differently, send some extra quotas to different regions because we're really at a tipping point here. So that's how they're going to handle that. But for a unified protest across the country that's a protest against the regime, well, for that we've got a long way to go. If you made protests legal in Moscow and Petersburg, then I do think a couple of 100,000 would come out today in both of these cities if they knew nothing would happen to them. But that's not the situation. So lots of love and talk more soon.